You can go ahead. Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for being here. Today, we have a fantastic guest with us, Roberto Andreoni, all the way from Italy. Roberto is an Italian composer with an illustrious international career, also an educator who's taught in the US, Italy, and Switzerland. So welcome, Roberto. We're very happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Treya. Thank you, all the already familiar faces I see in the background who are the students I've met in these days and from whom I'm learning many things. I think that's the right recipe for teaching, you know. I keep teaching because I learn a lot. And so it remains an urgent matter. So I haven't been called fantastic guest for many decades. So thank you for the introduction. And I was thinking of, well, when long ago I spoke for the first time with Elizabeth, I had the impression that we might be in a much more heterogeneous type of audience from the point of view of the background and also on the education of the attendees of a meeting like this. And so I didn't even think of being too specific, analytic, and deep into certain details and technicalities of composition. And I chose kind of a theme that I believed is a community theme. I mean, it's something that I believe is urgent for all of us because that's where we are embedded. And the topic is time, which is something we probably deal with for our entire life, whether we are musicians or not. So as musician, it's more fun to deal with time, but is an urgent matter for every living being, I think. And that's why I believe it's a community meeting topic. Is something that we have in common and we all are experiencing, and it's burning urgent for all of us. So I used a former pre-existing presentation, which I did fairly recently for a strange audience that was made of scientists, like astrophysicists, psychologists. There were some Nobel Prize for physics. There were, I don't know, a bishop, a meteorologist, a visual artist, and they also wanted a musician to participate to this, and this was for a larger publication about time. And they begged me to be very elementary because in all the subjects, the other speakers would not be acquainted with the technicalities of their respective co-speakers. That's why I started with a kind of an elementary type of approach, which can be, I think, hopefully fun and refreshing no matter what for all of us. So I share my screen. Share the screen, or I should share the PowerPoint. I guess. See this? Okay. So you also can tell me whether the sound is audible. I don't control it, and I hope it's not neither distorting or too soft. But this provocative sentence is music, a friendship between humans and time. And here we go. Okay, so this is a piece that I wrote for saxophone and piano, which I thought was pretty suitable to this famous time spiral GIF image. And I don't know if you just from the beginning of this piece, you probably felt the nature, which is both desperate and funny, of this kind of chase of the saxophone, hunting all the pitches of the total chromatic. And this is actually what it is. I called it audio game instead of a video game, and that's the form and the structure of the philosophy of a video game, you know, where you face, you enter like a room that has a certain challenge. And after you fulfill the challenge and win that, you enter in another room where the challenge is bigger, you know, and then you will step into a place where there are dragons, and another where there are flames that threaten you until you can finally get to the tower of the castle and get the princess. So it's made like that in progressive challenges until certain key pitches are like conquered, and that opens the final victory of the game. Sometimes I am afraid I tend to perceive my own time like that, you know, like certain days where you have to do 1,000 things, and they are all kind of challenging and maybe dangerous to some extent, or maybe fun and so forth. And then in the end, you say, did they do everything? Did they do everything correct? So time, we have a very precise perception of time, although philosophically speaking, it has been defined in very different ways. Maybe the most ancient, useful definitions that we study in philosophy and also in music is from Augustine, who wrote that actually here in Milan, in the city where I am now, where he described somehow his own existential experience of time, something that I certainly know what it is, but then if you ask me to explain, I don't know how to explain. And my awareness of it is supported by sensory experience of touching and hearing. Somehow I understand the hearing, but I always was kind of afraid I might be confused about the touching, what has time to do with touching. But later I can tell you that we will. So I don't know why. Apparently I'm not okay. This presentation is okay. Here we go. Kant, the famous German philosopher, said, space and time are the framework within which our mind is constrained to experience reality. Somehow is like, no matter what, whether you like it or not, we act, we live, we think, we move in a frame that is made of time and space. So somehow is a limit, is our human limit. And is also the limit of us musicians. Newton, who's more Anglo-Saxon and practical in his approach, is time is like an empty box inside which all events occur. And I know composers who compose like this, really, including one of my teachers when I was very young. This is the mentality of our planners, where the time of our week is an empty box and we need to fill it with our chores, with our duties, with our things. And on the other end, the score could be the empty box that we have to fill with sounds. So time as a available platform, boxes, that's why I put the Chinese boxes there, and that needs to be filled with your own contribution, your own work. I think that we mostly in our time and our society, we mostly go along this type of definition. I was very intrigued by a provocative sentence by Stravinsky instead, when he said, music establishes a friendship between humans and time. I was intrigued because I loved Stravinsky. I love Stravinsky, but I don't feel ready for this, maybe. Maybe in the urban, hectic life that I usually live, friendship is not really what I would call time. And yet, I think it has to do with my composing, maybe with our composing. So that's why I am arrogant enough to often use we in this presentation instead of me. I think that we dedicate so much time, energy, projects, planning, thinking, imagining, pursuit, energy, money into our musical activity because we have experienced at some point in our life this type of potential that music listening, music making, performing, or composing has to do with this, has to do with a better flow of time, a possibility of a better flow or a very suitable flow of time for ourselves. And honestly, I think that most of composers have sometimes a very different flow of time. I see there are people who keep needing to be admitted here today.
It's okay. I'm taking care of that.
Thank you. So let's keep going with provocative things. And okay, this is a video of one of those things that just happened to be viral on YouTube or on social media, where an Italian young dad is filming his child in the car.
Federico, che vuoi sentire? La musica? La musica?
Sì.
Ah,
Do you want
questa
to
vuoi
hear some
sentire?
music? Yes.
Senti un po'
You
se
want
ti
to hear
piace
this?
questa.
No.
Non ti piace questa, papà? Eh? No. E questa?
So the father plays children music.
Come no? In macchina con papà sentiamo la musica. Ma come no questa? E questa? Più per tre. Per tre. No. E che musica vuoi sentire, papà? Che vuoi sentire? I Zeppelin? Mannaggia, ma perché dobbiamo
He
sempre
wants to
sentire
hear
i
the Led
Zeppelin?
Zeppelin.
Scusa, questa vuoi sentire?
No.
Questa vuoi sentire?
No.
Senti un po'.
Look at the bliss.
You need fooling, baby, I'm not fooling, fooling. I'm gonna send you back to schooling, way down inside, honey, you need it. I'm gonna give you my love.
Expectation or something. The symbol. So, apart from the fact that this is really hilarious, I think, and fun, but how does a baby that is not articulate yet, he doesn't really speak Italian, he only says no and some onomatopoeic expression to be understood by his dad, so he doesn't even know what language is, and yet he does this when the congas, and how does he know that this is the congas? That is an instrument definitely bigger than him. what is that expectation, that fulfillment when finally the desired sounds arrive, and when the pulsing, drumming inspire him? Here we are, a tactile opportunity, And then I was thinking about that, and I think that actually, probably the first time we heard about time related to music is when we were in that age, and they told us, like, beat along the music, clap your hands, so go along the beat. So time is something that you beat, that you touch, that you tend to stomp or clap on. So it has to do with the pulse. I think we all know it, but it's never enough knowing it. I think that with our type of job, we can go deeper in our knowledge about things like this that are very elementary, So musical time has to do with pulses and pulses, but still, if I establish a pulse like this, a metronome, this is neither a rhythm nor a meter. We know why. Did I go out of my presentation? Okay. So what do I need to start having a feel of something more musical? Pulses are not enough. I need a stress on the pulse. So if I do, already there is a hierarchy. And I say, this is a pulse in 2, for example, or in 3, okay? Something like that. Why? That is another thing that fascinates me. Why do I say 1 where there is the stress? Why 1? Why don't I say 2? And I say 1 on the first one without an accent. The same happens if I prolong the pulse. If I do doo, 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 same dynamic, same pitch, same everything, same duration, but one is long and one is not. One is tenuto and the other is staccato. So these are part of our perception of sound. They are laws of psychoacoustics. A sequence of isochronic beats, a longer duration is the equivalent of an emphasis, and other aspects like this. So why, where there is the stress, we say 1, because there is actually another law that is very important for us composers. Anything different within a series of isochronic pulses creates a new pattern. So anything different is a beginning, has the value of a new beginning. So the same is true for meter, Hop, 1, 2, 3, hop, 1, 2, 3, hop, 1, 2, 3, hop. A repeated pattern of the physical activity could be a gymnastic exercise, or the background meter that we have in our mind. So since the time of ancient Greece, there is this dichotomy. The other day, like a couple of weeks ago, I went to a summer camp there were summer music camp of high school students. And then at some point I came up with a challenge for them, and I said, okay, describe my breath. And I was doing like, and I was breathing just loud as I normally breathe, and say, describe the sound. I'm deaf. Tell me what you hear. And it was not even 1 minute passed that I had 2 kids immediately telling me two very different answers. One said, oh, you are having like a inhale and exhale. So you have an in and out, and up and down. I said, yeah, that's correct. But another kid next to him said, oh, I just hear 4. I hear 1, 4, 1, 2, 3. So 2 sounds and 2 silences, where the stronger sound is number 1. So I hear a pattern of 4. I hear a meter of 4. And I said, look, in 1 minute, the two of you clarified all that you can read in the music literature of the human history about rhythm and meter. And this the dilemma that is on since ancient Greece. Is rhythm quality or a quantity? I tell you this, I mean, this is relevant for me because I started my musical my love for music as a percussionist. And so after my studies and stopping to perform and dedicating myself to composition, and then I went to America and I went to the University of California at Berkeley, where there was a famous professor who was the royal musician of Ghana. So in charge of the drumming orchestra of the court of Ghana, this Professor Lazekpo, who had 57 brothers, all musicians. There was a dynasty of musicians, evidently. And so I was very intrigued to go hear a real scholar of African music, what he was doing. And there was actually a very hippie type of gathering in his class, where people were just laying around in the classroom and performing. And I was listening, very fascinated to his drumming. And I was sitting at the dead end of the room because they were all undergraduates. I was a graduate student there. I was listening and taking notes and sketches of what I was hearing, of his solo improvisations. And then he stopped me at some point and said, hey, you down there, who are you? I'm sorry, you know, I'm the new Italian graduate student. I'm a composer. I'm here. Yeah, but what do you do down there? No, I'm just listening. No, you are not listening. Well, I'm writing some. Well, that's wrong. You will never understand African music if you do that. And then I was so embarrassed, you know. And, come over here. And then I had to go next to him. And everyone was looking at me, and it was very embarrassing for me. And so take off your shoes. Further step of embarrassment, take off your shoes and stay there. What do I do? You know, okay, are you there with all your weight on your feet? Yes. That's the starting point. Not a pen, a pencil, and a piece of paper with the music stuff on it. Is to feel your weight on the ground. Okay, now play this pattern. And he started doing a typical African pattern, no? And he said, okay, now your weight is completely on that. You keep doing that, but now you stand on one foot only. And then, and I put your weight completely on one leg or the other. That's what is, you know, the rhythm is your life ongoing. And where you put your weight is how you face it. So you can be very relaxed and do this, but you could do it in not just one time, but in 2. 1, 2, or in 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. I don't know if you can hear my feet stomping, but or in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. or in 6. So that is the beginning for understanding African music. For me, it was a revelation, because as a Western musician, I'd always faced it with the frame of mind of an empty box behind my head, which is the meter, that needs to be filled with nice rhythms. And instead, for the first time, I was understanding that also the opposite was possible, completely legitimate, and quite fascinating, actually. So this, we can have some fun with another little experiment, okay, with using Celia Cruz and the song of the chicken, La Gallina. Which comes first? The rhythm or the meter?
¿Dónde está mayor? ¿Dónde está?
This is like saying
Ya no vende por las calles.
the egg or the chicken.
Ya no pregona en la esquina. Ya no quiere trabajar.
And the answer is pretty easy, you know, because actually there is no answer to this query. Like the egg is inside the chicken and the chicken is inside the egg. And so is a unlockable, wonderful dilemma for the musicians. And for me was quite a liberating experience in the way I started thinking of musical time. Because in general, I was very intellectual and having a lot of fun researching for interlocked patterns and complex polyrhythms, you know. There are examples. And for me, it's a joy to hear a 2 on a 3 on top of a 5 on top of a 7, and maybe trying to do it, you know, with 2 hands and 2 feet when possible. But really, then I discovered that this was nothing new, and was present also in the European heritage and tradition. The very beginning of polyphony is also the beginning of polyrhythmic enjoyment of the vocal music that we all know and we studied with music, Western music history, like the patterns sketched by Perrotin on top of the long drones of an Alleluia, and on each syllable there is then a great richness of decorations, arches, pinnacles, vowels, exactly what happens in the design of the cathedrals of that time, where the micro is filling a macro, and vice versa, the macro mirrors the micro at all levels, with shapes, recurrent shapes and forms, rotating shapes and forms. And the same thing that happens in art or architecture. We don't have to wait until MC Escher to see what they could become in the polyphony of coexistence. But really, it's something that was already there. Not to mention the research of Simcha Aron that already Berio speaks about when he speaks about his own research. The Israeli French researcher and ethnomusicologist who went to the Central Africa to record the Baka pygmy tribes doing their own mysterious fugues, because really it's what they do is a yodeling of 4, 5 part fugues. You see, they start from the pattern. So where is the downbeat? It's everywhere, because each of them has a different downbeat, and they all interlock perfectly. So this is actually very similar to the same idea that is behind the making of an African carpet, with all the colorful patterns of triangles, squares, rectangles, circles that become like punctuate the fulfillment of the space. And the same is the acoustic space is fulfilled by these perfect fifths on top of each other in a similar way to the cathedral modularity that I showed before, and what is happening in this type of music. So is the result, surprisingly, is a flow, very joyful and relaxed. I've seen a piece dedicated to African polyrhythms in a concept of Le Percussions de Strasbourg in Milan. They were coming from France. They are a fantastic group of percussionists. And yet you could tell how tense they were in creating something very similar to what these women and children are doing, with no stage. I don't know if rehearsal is necessary or what. So it's a way of going with the flow rather than calculating the flow. And this is a dichotomy that I think is in a lot of us, and has to do with the destiny of a lot of art, classical music of nowadays, or educated music, as we can say. You know, I lived long enough to hear a lot of insults sometimes from performers, from people in the audience. You know, I don't like to be. Actually, I like to be. In these days, I am in a festival of new music like this, and it feels good. It feels very comfortable, I have to say. Why? Because like we are all the same breed in here. We love it, and we understand it in a certain way, with the curiosity of deep understanding. But I like to expose my music out there, you know, where I don't know who is going to listen to it, educated or non-educated, people who have never listened to classical music, not to mention contemporary music, ethnic music, or anything different from the mainstream top chart. And there are many surprises that are very interesting. Usually very good surprises. There is another level of thinking of time in music, which is the agogics. Something that actually Italian composers had the genius idea to synchronize with the average step of humans. And this actually contributes to make the destiny of music, of Western music, especially, more human, you know, because it's actually walk as if you walked when you walk slow. And so Vivaldi wanted to make sure that his score would not be performed like or that's not my music. My music is if you walk allegretto, then it makes sense. So the pace of the pulse is another crucial aspect. And in our tradition is physiological. Not so nowadays, I think. Very often, the use we make of our tempi is actually non-physiological. So I liked this provocative sentence of Suzanne Langer, philosopher who died not long ago, California philosopher, who said, we perceive the speed of music neither in function of its agogic tempo nor the number of its rhythmic subdivision, but rather from the frequency of new events that occur. And this, I think, you know, many times when we speak of our own music in the world, it seems that the issue is dissonance or consonance. And for very long, it's been like that. I don't think that really the issue is dissonance or consonance. More than that, there is the issue of frequently interrupted or non-frequently interrupted. Frequently changed or non-frequently changed, because that detaches the music from the physiology of the flow. So I think that from this point of view, a very important composer has been this guy. Does anyone know who this guy is? I don't think so, because he's not famous. But he's actually very famous and very important, I think. A very important American composer, actually. Change completely. Tempo, key, everything changes. In the Looney Tunes, the Warner Brothers philosophy, that was the opposite of the Disney philosophy, where music is always chosen first, and then the artwork is made on top of the music. Here, the idea was make a crazy cartoon that moves like no human being or living creature could actually move, and then make a music on top of it. So the music has to become extremely interruptive and change in a 1,000 parameters in a matter of few seconds. That's the beginning, actually, of all the music that then turns into what nowadays we call sound branding, or we call advertisement music, jingles, the sounds for video games, for telephone ringers and things like that. So a similar experiment for me was this very large installation, as I was telling you. I've heard my music more times out of the concert halls than in the concert halls. So this was just in the public square in the center of Milan. There was a large projection and installation in octophony dedicated to the Italian futurists, where there was the 100 years of of futurism, 100 years from the manifesto of Marinetti. I don't know if all of you are acquainted with the novelties brought by the futurist movement in contemporary art. But arrogant trust for speed, energy, mechanics, industry, even war machines, explosions, chemistry. And the same was true for sound. So in occasion of this large exhibition, I prepared the project, and then with the help of other 3 composers and as many visual artists, we set up a, let's see, just an excerpt of this, of episodes dedicated to futurism. Okay, this, for example, is a pretty interesting episode, which is war. As you see, there are some performers in the windows of the Royal Palace in Milan. So there is live performance processed with max MSP patches, and the visual creation is synchronized with the music after being prompted with algorithms and images made by these painters. So these are all words used by the futurists, words of war. Drums become war machines. After the war, there is the disaster. And then there are other episodes, like this anti-romantic episode, with rap interventions.
Sorgi la sera e vai, contemplando i deserti. In dei tiposi,
One of the slogans was, "Let's kill the moonlight," as
ancora
a
non sei tu
symbol
paga
of
di
romanticism.
ricordare i sempiterni calmi.
Si udì gridare nella solitudine aerea degli altipiani.
Let's burn the museums was another futurist slogan. And that is a museum. So we put it on fire. Only with these sounds of flute, piano, drums, and the voices. It lasts about 1 hour. This is already a condensed version of 15 minutes, and that hour went on every night, and it was became very popular. Actually, thousands and thousands of people attended it by entering in and out the museum of the Royal Palace and passing by the Duomo Square, to the extent that then it won an important award as a public art event, which actually in the Italian jury defeated the inauguration of the Olympics in Turin that were that year. So this was a very interesting experiment of, oops, keep having some trouble, okay. I think you know these type of scores. I don't need to stay on the famous, why am I putting piano phase next to Lux Eterna, to make the next point, which for more than a century, we have been stretching, we, not just I think, we have been stretching musical time towards opposite limits. Repetitive loops versus non-periodic structures to an utmost extent. And that is where we are moving now. That's why the futurists, whether we like them or not, they've been banned from Italy for decades because considered like connected with fascism, somehow inspiring fascism with the assertive arrogance of their trust for machine wars and progress, in a way that now we have to do a lot of work to undo what it was done in the first part of the 20th century. But still, you know, they started triggering, they opened a way in which we move and operate. The book of Luigi Russolo, futurist, Milanese futurist, that was somehow the inspiration of the electronic music. It seemed like a science fiction idea, music made with electricity, music that can move microtonally. They were crucified by the public opinion at the times, you know. And today we swim in that broth, you know. And somehow that brings us to I just wanted to wrap up all these strange mix of input that I've been throwing there for your own enjoyment or not enjoyment. I hope this anything of this helps you, I don't know, get new ideas for your own writing, and be more convinced that nothing of this is relevant, or maybe that something of this could be relevant for you as well. And I made this diagram of what I call the redundancy clock, because I think that music of today moved away from a syntactic type of flow, which means what? Phrasing. phrase, frase, in Italian is sentence, you know, and musical phrasing is the quintessential element of a musical attempt that is lasted for 300 and plus years of having music resemble language. After all, the entire tonal period is the ambition of transforming music in a language, and therefore with precise syntax and syntactical hierarchy, exactly like language is organized. We move away from that towards the opposite directions, as I was saying, either the so-called new simplicity or the new complexity, which, as far as the time flow is concerned, mean a highly periodic time flow versus a non-periodic time flow, absolutely non-periodic, or the extreme opposite of language, which is the further dam that was broken by John Cage, which is the indifference about both of the above. So randomization. Honestly, I made this map because I think I use all four reference points of this map to different extents in my compositions. When I step in highly periodic time flow, I tend to do it in a polyrhythmic way, as I was saying before. This is a little excerpt from another theatrical work I've done, the La Missa à l'homme désarmé, the Mass of an unarmed man, which actually tells the true story of some farmers in the region where I live that went on to combat the resistance against the Nazi occupation. And so at the end, when they finally liberate this little village, they dance like a primitive tribe around the Nazi tank that they have conquered in this theatrical moment of 1945. You still hear the voice of the actor in this excerpt.
1945.
That's a guitar. So the ensemble was viola, guitar, clarinet, and double bass. And as you hear, it's a very heterophonic type of texture created by the polyrhythmic percussive approach of all the attack modes and the noise component techniques of the guitar. Randomization, as I tell my students many times, is not like melting something that would otherwise be structured, but is a solution to structure things that would sometimes be impossible to be structured otherwise. And they say, oh, what does it mean? And then I say, okay, exercise number one, which I had to actually resolve in the finale of my first opera that I wrote, when the whole opera happened under the campanile, the medieval campanile of the Bergamo Cathedral. Is a sacred oratorio. They called it opera because it has costumes and so forth, but it is actually a religious theme. And every hour, actually, the opera lasts almost 2 hours, and it starts with the bells of the campanile and it ends with the bells. So if I tell my students, write down the phenomenon of the bells of the campanile, imagine 4 bells with 4 different pendulum that go at different speed with a fixed pitch. How do you represent it in a score? Randomization, there it is, the bell. Right now, I don't know if you can hear it. So what is the best way to represent the complexity uncontrollable of 4 pendulums or 5 pendulums, or in the case of the finale of my opera is 8 pendulums. So there is this final long aria that was posing some challenges to me. Now it's difficult for me to explain because I mean, you don't know the topic of the opera and all the rest. And the recording is terrible. Unfortunately, there was kind of a hurricane the last day of the 5 replicas of this, of the 5 replays, and lots of stuff went destroyed, including the recordings. But there was a little television show that I took that remains like my surviving testimony of that large endeavor. So there is a long text. Mary tells the prophecy of the future of humanity, let's say, to make a long story short. And this is a very articulate prophecy, very long. It tells about the wars, the crusades, and all the bad things that will happen and what, and so forth. And it's too long of a text to be put in music. By itself, it would be 1 act, because text is compelling for your time. When you're dealing with musical time, text must be heavily trimmed, which sometimes contemporary scores do too much, I think, to the extent that it's not understandable anymore. Any flow of narration, any understanding of the context. So I resolved this by having an actress read the long text. The singer is merely shadowing certain syllables of the long text in singable pitches that create lines and give a direction to the reading of this long excerpt. At the end, after this portrait of upcoming suffering of the humanity, there is also a shed of light that says, but there will be hope. And on this final word of hope, it says, vola, fly now, fly out, to the Peter, who is in front of her, and says, now fly, and the flute remains alone, and the bells start. But the bell was only one with the time of the campanile. So I had the 8 percussionists of the orchestra during the long aria go actually around the audience that was all in the outdoors, and performing this randomized pendulum with each of them with 1 pitch, so that the entire audience felt embedded in this resonance of bells. Those bells were revealing the pitch set that was used in the 3rd act of the opera, And when finally 4 horns that also interpolate with the percussionists perform their last notes, they add the last missing note that gives a completely different tonal center to that otherwise random pitch set. I don't know. It's kind of, oh, actually, should I do this? Yeah. For whatever we can detect from this. From here.
Non ci sarà nessuna civiltà senza il perdono, nessun decoro nei costumi, nessun patrimonio. Il livido contegno delle mie dominerà il giorno delle notti, i dolori dei piaceri. Nulla infatti può sottrarsi alla virtù. Agli uomini soli fu dato per loro una cena. A noi fu dato un gioco dolce, un carico leggero.
Vola, 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 vola. So again, was it audible at all? I hope so. Now there is no way for me
Yeah, we could hear it.
to find out. Okay. So, but this whole episode that you have and I think sometimes randomization is a good solution to provide a complex situation out of a simple idea. Not always so. Sometimes when it's, for example, inside an ensemble within a predetermined slice of time, it may be counterproductive. But in certain other situations like this, where there is a high chance of interference of doors, and not in a concert hall, in a medieval porch and everything else with 1,000 people around and things like that, it's the musicians cannot look at the conductor, and so they need another type of reference point, oral, exactly like it is in many other traditions that are non-Western, and usually is enough to trigger large ensembles or big responsorial type of interaction, of musical interaction in Japanese, Indonesian, Chinese music, and Filipino music, and many other things. So this is superfluous, I think. We know, that whatever, turn the radio on, turn the TV on, go into a shopping mall or anything else, and what you hear is just loops, thanks to our friend Philip Glass started that, but most of the music is actually articulated by loops, which is the opposite of the way the phrasing of a Chopin piece is. You don't need to hear these examples because you know them. I just am showing you how I have, why I've been interested in these type of things and how I've used them for some of my composition. This also is another fairly long piece, which can be summarized in a very simple scheme, which goes back to the slide number 1 of what we watched, which is the steady pulse. When I came back from America, some colleagues and friends said, write a piece about your experience in California. Wow. And there was a very good pianist, and she said, okay, write a piece about some input of what you have learned in California. And I said, honestly, one of the things I've been most shocked, my culture shock was to see the frequency of changes that occur in the American society. I've seen in a few years, so many of my friends there change their musical style, technique, their home. They keep divorce and remarry, change sex, change religion, change everything, the landscape, because there was a big fire, there was another flooding, lots of natural disasters during those years. There was the big earthquake of San Francisco when I was there. So this frequency of changes was what remained for me as the most shocking difference from what I was used to. And so I thought, well, a little symbol of that could be the total relativization of the certainties, of all certainties. For example, the pulse, and the fact that the pulse is 1 when we count. What if the steady pulse is 6? So it's pa 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 pa, or it's 5 pa pa pa, or it's 4 pa pa pa. So the pulse is steady, but is interpreted by the interpreter as being the 6th of 6, the 5th of 5, the 4th of 4, and then the 5th of 6, the 4th of 5, the 3rd of 4, and so forth until doing the entire loop of this. I think maybe we can just go through the beginning of it, because the pitch material is very simple. Is this 0-1-5, and its inversion 0-4-5 pitch set. It's only made of 2-3 intervals, and that's it. But they transform according to the beat in something African sounding, Latino sounding, European sounding, and therefore undergoing the same type of transformation. and so forth. And now I realize that time is passing, indeed, as it is always the case. And I want to reach conclusion with a couple more examples. But I think that it's clarifying a little bit my way of thinking about time. And so it was impressive to hear a famous Italian poet in a lecture that I attended a few months ago, where he made a parallel of dichotomies that in the current age are typical of all the arts. So using symmetry versus asymmetry and so forth, repetition, non-repetition. Somehow he was going in the same direction of what we were saying here. Okay. A little further level of understanding of time. This is just the beginning of the second movement of my string concerto. Few seconds, nothing long. I hear something recurrent and I expect. So I think that this dynamic, is recurrent in the way composers communicate an idea. And definitely for me, this was a kind of a randomized beginning where the sections of the string orchestra are assigned numbers, which is number 1 through 21, that are the first 21 interventions that they come. So after I hear 1, I know that it's my turn since I am number 2. So it's like a game to be played in the orchestra until they know that it's complete. The audience doesn't know. And that is creating the breaking of the mechanism with something surprising. And I think that this is the level that we call form, which is always articulated in terms of memory, perception of what I just heard, and recurrently I recall as familiar, and therefore expect a development of that until a surprise comes and brings forth a novelty. So what we have seen is that musical time is a very ramified parameter. It's not one thing, but is so many things together at once. And what is nice is that not necessarily all the factors are in the ballot at all time, but we can do all the possible combinations of this neuronal network when we listen, but especially when we compose. And the composer really plays around all of these parameters at once, turning like on and off all the cabling of this patch of the composite elements of musical time, with rubato and alea being somehow completing the picture. All of the above imply movement. Music itself is defined as movement. A book that I suggest you to read is Forms of Vitality by Daniel Stern. He's a neuropsychiatrist. He died recently. He lived in New York and worked a lot with the arts, music and dance especially. And it's fabulous to see how he explores like infanthood and the things I showed at the beginning, how a child starts the appeal of sound, of time, of going along, of synchronization, and presents these aspects as forms of vitality. Music is a form of vitality. Sound itself is like that. The opposite, the total absence of movement is perceived by creatures as either death signal or fake death, which is even more dangerous, perhaps. So we have started with the baby, and I wanted to finish with another provocation of a baby and another little excerpt of something of mine, maybe, if there is time. You stop me because I don't see any clock around here. Oops. This is an American baby with an American mom.
Mommy's gonna sing you a song. You want Mommy to sing a song, honey? Let me know how you feel about the song, okay? I don't want you to come round here no more. I beg you for mercy. You don't know how strong my weakness is, or how much it hurts me. 'Cause when you say it's over with her, I want to believe it's true. So I let you in, knowing tomorrow I'm gonna wake up missing you, wake up missing you, when the one you love's in love with someone else.
Overwhelming.
Don't you know it's torture? I mean, it's a living hell. No matter how I try to convince myself, this time I won't lose control. So I let you in, knowing tomorrow I'm gonna wake up missing you, wake up missing you. Oh, you feel the pain in the song, eh, honey? Big tears.
I think it's phenomenal because this is again a pre-linguistic type of experience that is going on. And Stern explains this actually, sorting out things that we are sometimes very confused, even as musicians, but especially as listeners. You know? The first is the physical stimulus, then the neurological one, then the psychological one, third, that comes third, and then the elaborated psychological one. But what is phenomenal is that the boy doesn't, I don't think he really understands the topic of the song. It's just the timbre of the mother, the intensity of that form of vitality, of that sound moving in time. So I think that this goes beyond empathy and gives a special power and special responsibility to us musicians, because music is capable of sympathy. And in fact, the Aeolian harp vibrates by sympathy, you know, which is more than empathy. It's just more than being in your shoes, is communion and is moving, you know. That was a real interview. Professor Einstein, is your thought driven by images or by words? None of the above. My mind is driven by forces and volumes that move in time and space. I am no Einstein, but I tend to agree a lot. I think that as musicians, this is a very musical way of thinking. So movement, this is sometimes an exercise I give to my students, again, could be represented. This is again a list given by this neuropsychiatrist, which they are all musical elements. Acceleration, slowing down, spinning, fading, exhausted, hanging, reluctant, sliding, relaxing. Take a musical element. three notes or a timbre, three sounds, and not even exact pitches, and make them a composition just by having those elements travel through these aspects of movement. This has to do with the Gestalt theory, of course. So that the curve of intensity displayed by each of these events in a segment of time is what we call the Gestalt. These forms of vitality. I think that there is one piece of mind that it could really be a path through those movements. It's a cello solo piece. We can listen to it if you want, because it moves from anger and resentment to being moved and almost to a thank you note, a praise and a thank you at the end.
We still have about 20 minutes, just to let you know, so we have plenty of time to hear some more examples.
Okay, good. So there is something more, but I also wanted to have some interaction with you guys. And thank you for helping me. Oops. I don't see why I don't see the, I don't see the music file in here. Maybe it didn't load it. Okay, I can go pick it up somewhere else. If you don't mind, let's see. Maybe here I have solo pieces, cello. Let's see. Okay, Bacon, because it's dedicated to Francis Bacon and his sculptures and the way to dismember human figures to like a butchery exhibition that in the end is instead very human and moving. Can you see the score? Okay. Okay. So all this articulates in compositional processes. This is a list made by Sciarrino, actually, in his book, the windows of musical forms, that he summarizes a process of accumulation, multiplication, permutation, what he calls little bang as opposed to the big bang, which is a moment of change. What in old times could be a cadenza, a cadence, not a cadenza, proliferation and ramification. And then, I mean, you go through those processes using compositional techniques. And there are so many that you all seem already very acquainted with for what I've seen in the past days. But there is never enough opportunity to experiment these lists. What is the result of process and technique is texture. Really, I think that our music proceeds more by recognizable textures, even more than harmonies, even more than rhythms or meters. And the time flow is a time flow of textural changes, and textures become more complex as the ones that I outlined in red are, I believe, the most used, which used to be extraneous to the Western tradition. Thinking of holophonic, the technique that includes noise and space. So the sound landscape in which something occurs. Here there was a little example of the end of a piece of mine called Vicini e Lontani, close by and far away. So it's just a small chamber piece, but there is an interacting reverb, a simple reverb plugin on stage, which is part of the performance because that reverberation gives, adds, and subtracts. This is even purposely more simple than any interaction with a max algorithm or patch. This is a very simple adding or subtracting space. By adding or subtracting resonance, you get the idea of something close by or far away. So the consideration of space is actually changing our perception of time, I think, and of the entire context. architectural organization of time has been an intriguing ambition of humans over all the civilization. But nowadays, I think we are particularly into it, and not just thanks to Netflix. You know, books, movies, video games, everything. The lockdown threw us in a virtual world where I unfortunately see teenagers sometimes who would rather not get out of their room, but not for the fear of COVID, just because virtual is easier than real. And so paradoxes and virtual experiences like imaginary parallel universes and things like that are like daily bread of your generation, I think, and it's something that we need to deal with. When I say architecture of time, I have in mind having encountered and met in person Conlon Nancaro in Mexico City, who is another inspiration, has been for my work for all these years. This is one of his famous, the analysis of one of his famous player piano pieces with the lines of textures being conceived as vectors, conveyors of forces. So because of this, actually, I'm thinking, no, I don't. I
We have
wonder
about 5 more minutes in case
Okay.
you're wanting to take
So,
some questions.
Exactly, this one, since we are in the Olympics, this is another piece, is probably the most performed of my pieces. This phenomenal duo, actually he is a famous scholar and Italian musicologist, and she's a actress, clown, mime, and clarinet player, fantastic clarinet player. I wrote for them a piece called Olympia, which is a long list of sports, but it's not promenade music. It was actually a study about movement, vectors of forces. For example, shooting, archery. So what I watched the videos, I interviewed people who do these sports and looked at the muscular or force application to the material and how it's being released. And it turned out in being a comic piece, is a sketch. Actually, we can watch just a little excerpt of it as a finale, as an ending of this talk. I hope it's still here somewhere. Oy, oy, oy. Let me see. That's why. Okay. Okay, this is, for example, archery. They're miniatures that portray the form of vitality of that gesture. This is shooting, for example. So this billiard. Bowling and curling. I move a bit forward, maybe. Okay, that was golf. And there's a funny one. Tennis. There are 24 sports, so it's then they transform it into a piece of mime. Okay, and now I actually would like to hear from you, because I can conclude with this. Actually, this was a definition that once I read about music. Music is a wonderfully complex way of feeling and thinking, and I added, and wasting no time. So I hope I didn't waste your time for this long and disorder run through the many facets of musical time in my perception and my experience. But if there is any consideration, although, or questions, I would love to hear.
Kira asked in the chat if you would be able to share your presentation with us, like through email or something, so that we could read it in retrospect.
I think it will be recorded, right? So
yeah,
it's in the recording. If I attach it to an email, it's gonna weigh 1 giga.
Lansing has a question.
Nice to see you. I don't hear you. Oh, there's a chat, maybe.
Go ahead, you should be able to talk.
We weren't allowed to unmute ourselves. Thank you so much for this such important, thought-provoking presentation. Time is one of my favorite topics, and the perception of time and everything that you talk about. I want you to come to be a guest in my class, but one thing that you didn't touch upon, and I wonder how if this is also something that you think about, is the perception of poly, the idea of not just polyrhythm, which you did touch upon, or polymeter, but polytemporality. In other words, a sense in a movie or a book or in a piece of music that time is unfolding at different rates of speed simultaneously.
Well, yes, that is what I hinted to when I was talking about the paradox, stepping into paradoxical, not really experienceable aspects of time, but it still are there, you know. I also hinted to it when I spoke about polytextures, textures that happened at the same time. And I think in music, this really started with the Rite of Spring. In the Rite of Spring, we started hearing different phenomena running at the same time. And everything of our activity somehow starts from there. The fascination of the new music probably starts from that. Not just the polyrhythms, but the poly textures and the polyphony of events. Then I'm not Elliot Carter, so I'm not able to do a calculation of different characters that within a string quartet behave so differently until they randomly touch each other, and then everything changes like that with a perfect calculation. I don't know, maybe because I'm Italian, there is an element of anarchy in our life that sometimes is like a better solution for multiplicity rather than hyper organization. But it's super intriguing, and far from being solved. Is a constant field of my interest. And
This is one of, I don't know if you can make it, but for everyone else, this is exactly one of the things I'm going to talk about in my own presentation about polytemporality. So it just connects. We're brothers in.
Bravo, great! I can't wait.
We are running a little short on time here since we have another presentation coming up. But thank you so much, Roberto, for a really fantastic presentation. We loved having you, and it was really great to hear some of your music and just generally a very thought-provoking presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience and everything. I didn't have the time to read the chat, but I will see that. Thank you again for having me with you guys. I felt in a community in all these days, and a lot more must come up with the coming concerts and presentations.